Today, I'm going to be telling you about my experience with the Canon EOS R8 over the past 2 months, as well as some things I've noticed about the camera and the best accessories that I found. So, let's get into it. First off, let's talk about the physical attributes of the R8. It is a full frame camera, so it's very capable, but it's very compact as well. It's even smaller than the Canon R7, so it's pretty thin and light. It's actually so small that sometimes I wish it was a little bit taller, because my pinky doesn't really grab onto anything. If you want to get the extra grip to make it a little bit bigger, you can get that for like $80, but by itself it's super small. It's easy to put on a gimbal, and I wouldn't go much smaller than this. It's nice and comfortable to use. As far as ports and buttons and stuff like that goes, there's a cold shoe on the top, which is smart, so you can put flashes and audio recorder, stuff like that. And then on the side, we got some ports, so a micro HDMI, a USB-C, which you can use to charge the camera, and a trigger input, as well as headphone out and microphone in. So pretty well-rounded in terms of ports and stuff like that. The screen is a flip-out screen, which is awesome. It's great for when you're vlogging. You can just hold it out like this, or when you're shooting low and you want to put the screen down like this or up high. It's just awesome. And to protect the camera, you can fold the screen like this, so when you're putting it in a bag or something, it won't scratch. I love this. Most of the Canon cameras have this, and it's just great. There's also an EVF. It's a little bit too close to the camera for my liking. I prefer the R7, which has the EVF sticking out a little bit more. But generally, it's been great. There's a diopter adjustment on the front of it, so if you need to adjust that, you can. It's super simple. And there's a little sensor right here, so it automatically turns off and on when you put it up to your eye. So that's great. As far as the buttons and switches on the side of the camera goes, there's a little button pad with some standard buttons, like the info button and the little pad. There's no joystick like there is on the R7 and the R10 and some of the other cameras, but there is some of the other dials. So this top one right here is set to default for shutter speed, and this one is set for f-stop. You can adjust all these buttons and dials to be whatever you like. I wish there was one more, like the R7 has, for adjusting the ISO. Normally I have to just press on the screen and change it. You can change the ISO using the buttons, but I usually just use the screen. And then it has the off, on, and lock switch right here at the top. So you can do that. And then there's the mode button as well, which all Canon cameras have. And what's super nice is this camera has a toggle between photo and video. So we can just switch it from photo to video. So as far as the buttons go, it's really great. It's not as many buttons as I would hope for, like the R7 has, but for a camera at this price point, and for this size, it's totally fine. As far as powering and storage options go, there's one LPE17 battery. It's super small, so the battery life isn't the best. I was able to get a little over an hour, 30 minutes recording 4K 60 in C-Log 3. So it's not as good as something like the R7, but for the size of this camera overall, it's okay. If this is your only camera, I would recommend getting at least 2 of these batteries, probably 3, and for now, I would go with the genuine batteries. Maybe later I'll check out some of the fake ones. Generally, fake ones have been okay with other cameras, but there have been some issues. There is a little tab right here, so if you want to get a dummy battery to a V-mount battery, you can do that. And then the SD card slot is in the same door, which is kind of nice in scenarios and not in others. It's okay. It supports up to UHS 2 V90 cards, and I've been using my Angelbird V90 card and it's been awesome. No issues there. Now there is only one SD card slot compared to the R7, which has 2, and that's nice for redundant recording. But if you get a good SD card, you should be fine. I've never had a corrupted file on either one of my Canon cameras, so as long as you get a good card, you should be good to go. Before we move on to the image quality, I will say that this camera will overheat in direct sunlight and anything over about 75 degrees if you're recording 4K 60. So just note that. But other than that, it's been okay. I feel like this camera is in a similar scenario that the R5 was originally. Canon could push it a little higher than it is, so there have been some issues with thermal throttling and shutting off in hot temperatures. So be aware of that if you're planning to use this camera a lot outdoors, especially with 4K 60. Let's move on to the sensor. It has the same sensor from the Canon R6 Mark II, so it's 26 megapixel full frame sensor, and it has a super fast sensor readout at around 14.5 milliseconds. So for the price point, this is just the best sensor you're gonna get from Canon. It performs exactly like the R6 Mark II, except it doesn't have any stabilization, which is fine if you have a stabilized lens or you're using it with a gimbal. For photos, there is a first curtain electronic shutter instead of a full mechanical, so this isn't as good. I haven't noticed any other differences other than speed between the Canon R8's first curtain electronic and the Canon R7's full mechanical, other than that the shutter doesn't close at shutdown, which can be nice from preventing dust into the sensor. The sensors do automatically clean themselves, which is nice, but this is only for small dust and debris, and you're going to want to get sensor wipes to clean your sensor once in a while. I'll link some down below. So as far as the sensor, it's awesome. It can do 4K video oversampled from 6K in C-Log3 in a couple different color formats, and it can do that up to 60 frames a second. It can do 1080p at 180 frames a second, which is awesome. And it does this with IPB and IPB light compression. There is no way to get raw video out of this camera, but if you want to get the best performance out of this camera, I would recommend getting something like a Blackmagic Video Assist and use that to record your footage out of the HDMI port. The bitrate only goes up to about 400 megabits a second, so it's not the highest quality video. And it's not an all-intra format. So if you want that, make sure to get an external recorder. I haven't had the chance to use one of those yet, so make sure to subscribe to the channel, and maybe we'll look at doing that in the future. So as far as video goes, the R8 is a great camera for the price. If you're wanting to get into the cinema world, I would recommend maybe a Pocket 6K as an alternative option, but you lose out on a lot of the convenience features that the Canon R8 offers, like autofocus and some of the other easy to use features. It's a hybrid camera, it's not a cinema camera. As far as photos go, it's pretty sharp at 26 megapixels. I do prefer the R7 a lot of times in daylight because it has the 35 megapixel sensor, and it only can do 6 frames a second first curtain electronic. First curtain electronic does get rid of all rolling shutter versus electronic, but does limit you to that 6 frames a second, versus 40 frames a second when you're using the electronic shutter. 40 frames a second is incredible, especially when you're using raw photos. It can burn through your buffer really fast. One thing to make sure to change is when you do get this camera to turn digital lens optimizer to standard instead of high. If you set it to high, it'll severely limit how fast it writes to the card because it has to do that extra processing. Even with a V90 card, it's pretty slow unless you turn that setting off. But if you do that, you shouldn't have any problems at all. If you do get a V90 card, it can almost keep up with the 40 frames a second. You'll just have to stop here and there to let it sit for a second. Now it does shoot photos in compressed RAW and full RAW, as well as several JPEG options. And you can change your color space from sRGB to Adobe RGB, so a ton of options for photos, as well as bulb mode and different exposure settings, and focus bracketing and stuff like that. So as far as photos go, it's a really well-rounded camera. If you're doing a lot of low-light photography, this is definitely the camera to get because of that full-frame sensor. So overall, if you're okay with a smaller battery and some of the overheating issues in direct sunlight, this is an awesome camera to get. I would recommend getting the R7 if you're doing a lot of sports photography because of its higher frame rate for the mechanical shutter and because of its dual SD card slots, as well as having a higher megapixel count. So get the R7 if you're doing a lot of sports photography, and for everything else, the R8 has been fantastic. Now as far as some recommendations for accessories go, I would recommend getting this card from SanDisk. It's 512 gigs and will last you a full day in whatever you're doing. It's a ton of space. It can store over 14,000 photos with the R8, so a lot of photos. It can withstand all the video codecs that you can throw at it, so 4K 60 and C-Log, and is going to be the best bang for your buck card out there. This card does come in a variety of options, for example, 128, 256, 512, and a terabyte, as well as 32 gigs. I would recommend staying away from the 32 gig option because it's a little bit slower and it has a different file format. But 256 or 512 gigs will be awesome for this camera. So this is the card I recommend, it's linked below. As far as lenses go, I've been using it with the Canon 50mm f1.8 prime lens. And this is an awesome option if you're just getting into photography and you don't want to spend a ton on your first lens. It's $150, so it's a great lens for the money. I would stay away from getting the kit lens, as in the past, every kit lens I've ever had, I've not been happy with. So I don't have the kit lens, but I would stay away from kit lenses in general. So the 50mm is great from Canon. I've also recently got the 16mm f2.8 lens from Canon as well, and I've been super happy with this. Because it's 16mm on a full frame camera, it's super wide. So if you're doing vlogging, just get the 16mm. And then the other lens that I've loved using with the R8 is the Sigma 70-200 f2.8. This is a fantastic lens if you're doing a lot of sports photography or wildlife photography, and is around $1,500. So it is cheaper than Canon 70-200. Generally, when shopping for lenses for this camera, make sure that they're full frame and bright, so I would recommend f1.8, 2.8, or f4. Anything darker than that, I would stay away from. And if you want to get stabilization, that is definitely a big benefit with this camera because it doesn't have any in-body stabilization. It does have digital stabilization, but I would stay away from that because you can always do that in the software like DaVinci Resolve or Premiere Pro, something like that. So those are some lenses that I would recommend. Everything that I talk about in this video is linked below. And then as far as tripods go, I would recommend getting the Peak Design Travel Tripod. This is a super small tripod that can support the weight and is really easy to use. So if you want to learn more about this tripod, check out the review I made. So that's pretty much it for recommendations: the SD card, lenses, and tripod. If you're doing a lot of video with this camera and need an external microphone, I would recommend the microphone I'm using right now, which is the Rode NTG4 Plus. It's a shotgun microphone, but it has a built-in battery, so you can use an XLR to 3.5mm adapter to go into this camera. Everything that I've talked about in this video is linked below if you want to pick it up for yourself, and I've made reviews and tutorials about most of the things. Well, that's pretty much it for this video. Overall, the R8 is a fantastic camera for the price, and I've been super happy with its performance. Other than sports photography and wildlife, this is a beast for pretty much everything, especially for video for its price point. Now again, if you want to do video specifically, I would recommend getting a Blackmagic camera like the Pocket 4K or 6K. But that's pretty much it for this video. Again, if you want to purchase any of the gear that we use on the channel, check out the Amazon affiliate links below. It really helps out the channel. If you want to become a Patreon supporter or channel member, check that out as well. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next video.